You are listening to a podcast from The Hindu.
The plague had been raging all this time in India. The ignorant populace, thinking that the British were trying to inoculate them with and not against plague, flew into paroxysms of terror at the very sight of a European hakim or a physician, while anything remotely resembling inoculation made them frantic. The physicians of the Calcutta hospitals were evidently very unwilling that I should use their cases for my experiments under these circumstances. And as I had no hospital of my own, as in Secunderabad and Bangalore, I was forced to send my assistants into the bazaar in order to try to induce patients to come to me on payment. Calcutta is not very malarious, especially at that time of the year. And it was only on large payment that several beggars with fever were induced to come to me. But when I proposed to prick their fingers in order to examine their blood, they generally left their money, took up their crutches, and fled without a word. So that was Ronald Ross, eminent physician and the second Nobel laureate in global history, who won the Nobel Prize for Physiology in 1902 for discovering the connection between mosquitoes and malaria. I am Jacob Koshi.
And I'm Shobna Nair, and this is the
Rear View. Here we dive into the history of things, events, discoveries, and inventions.
If you had heard our previous episode closely, you would remember me telling you that Jacob has this habit of throwing Easter eggs, hiding them in the conversation, and I had given you a hint that we would be discussing about Ronald Ross, whose Nobel uh, Prize speech Jacob just read out.
When we were discussing the Great Trigonometrical Survey, etc., we came across several passages where, the East India Company's officials or army men or even their scientists were trudging through, Indian swamplands or through forests, and it was routine for them to be felled by fever. And everybody from George Everest to to William Lambton, they all had to take these months off and go back to recuperate in England. So it was these fevers, and it was mostly malaria that was, considered the scourge, at least from the colonial eyes of of their colonial possessions like India and Africa, etc.
Yeah. And why are we discussing Ross? It's not just because of his malarial connections. It is also, he was the first Indian born British to be awarded Nobel Prize for his discovery of the life cycle of the malarial parasite. This is his story, and we will also be talking about where we stand with malaria today. But before we get into those details, let me give you a very brief pen portrait of Ronald Ross. He was born at Almora in Kumaon Hills on May 13th, Friday, 1857, 3 days before the Indian Mutiny broke out. He was the eldest of 10 children. His father, General Campbell Ross, was a Scot who worked with the Indian Army. Father Ross was also a watercolor painter of more than average amateur quality. He sang well, composed music, and after much traveling in the wake of his father's regiment, uh, Ronald Ross was sent at 8 years of age to England, which was the trend at that point, where as soon as you have a school going child, the child is sent to live with uncles and aunts.
No good schools in Almora.
No good schools in Almora, at least by the British standard. Mm, he was apparently a very voracious reader, but he wasn't exactly a bookworm. In fact, he was actually genuinely interested in real worms also around him, because one of his biographer, uh, usually there is a category of biographers who tend to embellish details of their subject's childhood. So here, Ross's biographer R.L. Megrose uh, writes that Ross, as a preteen, was busy compiling a zoological encyclopedia. I don't know how true that is. Was he just drawing lizards and caterpillars?
Well, because it was a kind of, it's a very English, especially
Hobby.
Elizabethan Victorian era teens, and they liked the natural world enough that there was always this culture, particularly among school boys, to collect animals and insects.
As a youth, Ross had no predilection for medicine. But at 17, he submitted to his father's wish to see him enter the Indian Medical Service, which was considered as a promising career at that point. Jacob, I believe that this is another one of the British imports.
Yeah, I mean, it was you either got into the equivalent of some company led service, or the more respectable medical services, especially for somebody who shows some amount of academic talent.
No, but what I'm saying is this Indian parents' obsession to make their children, I mean, to force their children into medicine or engineering, even against their wishes, seems to be a British import after all.
Probably.
In 1874, he joins medicine, and of course, he's not a keen student. Sitting in medicine lectures, he's instead looking for fairies in the sunbeams or imagining. He was busy writing poems instead of studying physiology. And
Who would like studying physiology, about an anatomy at that age? I totally empathize with him.
no, but I think he was a little more than your average Joe, who distracted average Joe. He was a little more than a daydreamer, also. But we'll come to that. Ross, obviously, because of his uh, lack of interest, failed to qualify the Indian medical services in time to reach India before his father's retirement from the military service, which the father really badly wanted to have his son serving in the Indian medical service alongside him, because these Indian medical service officers at that point were posted with the army regiments. But Ross wasn't entirely a slacker. He secured for himself a job as transatlantic steamship surgeon. This was a badly paid and awful job. Imagine at that point you had people packed like sardines on this ship. A lot of slave trade was going on. So a surgeon's job is actually very bleak. And obviously the pay was also not very good.
It must have been quite exciting to be on the sea, and anybody could fall sick at any time. You get to experiment with all kinds of ailments, and you learn a lot.
Yeah,
It's like being a
clearly.
first year intern in AIMS or something like that. You're always sent to the most
I guess
trying
I mean
circumstances.
I guess you have a point there, because it sort of provided the stockpile for not only his career ahead as a doctor, but also as a writer, as we shall see, because he continued writing prose and verse on those god awful ships.
And
While
medical and science history is rife with, especially in India, people who have made amazing insights on ship journeys, like Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, and you never know when
again,
inspiration strikes.
again, this man is throwing some Easter eggs our way. We shall ignore that for a moment. But he was also simultaneously preparing to get through the Indian medical services. And after all, Sarkari Naukri is everything. And he abided by his father's wishes. He finally, in early in 1881, The necessary examinations were passed without distinction, and he received a commission as surgeon in the Indian Medical Service, leaving for India in September of that year.
So here we're talking about Ronald Ross, and eventually we will discuss how this dreamy-eyed surgeon, who was on the ship, he was not particularly interested in physiology, how he got obsessed enough to pursue malaria and mosquitoes, and which would eventually make his name. But the whole problem of malaria, which is, was a very challenging one, particularly because it was a mysterious disease that actually was of interest to Britain only because it was a colonial power. So, for instance, malaria was always known. In fact, the word itself, malaria, it has Latin origins, and it kind of refers to something that comes from bad air. And it was known from, the tropical countries were rife with malaria. There was the fever, there was the lethargy, and frequently people had also discovered that it was frequently fatal. And even today, in large parts of Africa, large parts of Southeast Asia, and even in India, globally, there are anywhere about 200 odd million people who are afflicted by the disease. And it can lead to, while death rates have certainly come down over the eons, but it is depending on what version of malaria, whether it's falciparum or the milder Vivax version, which are the two main versions that circulate. It can be fatal, and we still don't yet have an effective vaccine to combat it, though there are several promising ones which are in trials. But Britain as a country was not really bothered with malaria. But there were two different all of the countries that were actually interested in the colonial period, in the early 20th century and late 19th century. It was important for British scientists and French scientists who also had their colonies in Africa to investigate this, because through the years they had seen that many of their troops, were being felled by this disease, and they had to come up with ways to make their army movements or their recruitments more
Or just generally going into virgin territory with lots of forest areas, and because the prevalent narrative of that point is that malaria comes, as you just said, bad because of bad air. So there are specific areas which are malarial and specific areas which are
So
non-malarial.
it was actually known. For example, it was known that swamps or places with marshy lands, and it was thought that there were actually, as Everest had once remarked, that there were actually vapors that were emanating from the soil that actually caused people to sick. And in fact, it was something that was so
Just hold on. I
fascinating to
love
them.
your commitment to keep calling Everest. I love that commitment. Carry on.
Once I learn something, I just can't unlearn it. It was believed that there were these vapors, that were coming in from the soil. And one another European country that actually, faced problems with malaria was Italy, because especially the southern parts of Italy with its Mediterranean climate. And that's why the term malaria itself came from Roman times, and, that association. So there were these multiple schools of, microbiologists, anatomists, physicians who were investigating the cause of this, of what could possibly be this particular disease. And eventually, this is till about the 1700s, it was in the air. But then there were several revolutions in the world of, worlds of microbiology. Parasites, this whole idea that there's a whole range of invisible organisms like bacteria, viruses, protozoa, all of these were known following Pasteur and the experiments in France, etc. So this was a dominant and emerging, field of knowledge and research that was coming up. So people started linking that maybe it's not just air, and maybe there are some parasites actually that are involved, in it. What were these parasites? Was it a bacteria? And there were different theories that were being floated on establishing a cause for this. Quite parallelly, establishing a cause was one aspect, but there was also the other aspect of cures. I mean, it was already known that there is this bark that was first bark from a tree that was
Yes.
isolated in Peru.
How can we not talk
The
about
cinchona.
gin and tonic while we're talking about malaria?
That was the British innovation. But the cinchona bark was known to be effective in suppressing the fever that resulted from from malaria. And in fact, a lot of British and French.
I think you were telling me that how this bark was first used in Peru, somewhere in Peru.
Yeah, that was where they
Yeah.
isolated and saw that it was effective, in this. And it was following that there was an entire commercial enterprise had also come up with it, because it was, you need the cinchona tree, which was native to Peru, was, they saw that this is something which was, which was useful. And secondly, this was also the time, the developments in organic chemistry, right, where people were able to extract the active ingredients out of plants. It was no longer, for instance, just consuming the bark or something like that. They realized that there were active chemicals that were there in this, how to isolate them. So they started actually growing these plantations in Southeast Asia, in India, so, all this plantation culture that came up was actually, there was a lot of them where they were growing them in several parts of India to be able to extract this, the cinchona. And the British being British, for them, the use of this cinchona, from which you could derive quinine and related compounds, they actually intended really for their own troops, for their own military men, such that, and they, even though they were aware that there were millions of Indians who were dying of this disease, who were fibrillated, who were kind of sick with it, but it was not for the natives, and it was just to preserve the,
Too many of natives
the empire.
Yeah, to spare.
So all in all, there is this, it is a big deal, malaria. There's its causes, it's the medicine, better medicine. So it became like this hot topic,
research topic, simultaneous research was going across the
So I guess
globe
this,
in
all of
multiple
this,
countries.
it was in the air, and I don't
Yeah.
know, Ross picked up some interest.
It was destined to happen. I mean, come on. If you are spending a lot of times outdoors, it's hardly possible that you can escape mosquitoes, right? So in 1881, September is when Ross comes to India. Now he spends time because this is the late 19th century is when the British are still mostly active in the southern India. So you have the Madras presidency and the area around it. So he was posted in Bangalore as acting garrison surgeon. And every evening mosquitoes will come and devour him, and he discovered that they were breeding in a tub outside the window, and he got rid of nearly all of them by simply cleaning out the tub and removing all the water. It looked like a simple enough solution to deal with the mosquito problem, which he then believed could be adopted by the entire regiment and save themselves from looking like a
It reminds me
pockmarked
of our MCD, or the Municipal
ants.
Corporation Delhi officials, who before the monsoon season
Yeah.
keep going all around
Yeah.
Delhi looking for people's AC, coolers.
And the flower pots. Anyhow, so he told his regiment in charge that please do this. Just tell everyone to clear out any stagnant water, and guess what he was told? He was told that we would be upsetting the order of nature, as mosquitoes were created for some purpose and it was our duty to bear with them. But Jacob, I know before we get into mosquitoes and malaria, I want us to take you to a small detour. Our Mr. Ross was also a writer and a poet, a writer. He's wrote yeah, decent musician. He was actually a polyglot. And in 1886, he had a prolonged stay in Andamans, and it was a very productive time for him. Imagine sitting in the verdant setting of tropical jungle, tapering off to a beautiful beach, casually lolling around in verandas, looking at all the birds and just listening into their various sounds. And he wrote his first romance novel
Oh
there.
my God.
All through his career, at least the productive part of his career, he was writing alongside doing his duties as the regiment surgeon, which is again another theme that seemed to recur in nearly all our episodes wherever we are discussing a British character. These guys have too much time on their hand. I mean, you're a surgeon, you're a doctor, you're also writing romance novels, you're writing bad poems, whatever. I mean, how do they find time?
They didn't have WhatsApp, they didn't have videos.
Yeah, and they didn't have a 1.5 hour commute.
Yeah, they didn't have meetings to attend.
Yes. Anyhow, in June 1888 to May 1889, after having served in India from 1881 till then, he took a year off work. As you were just saying, Jacob, that this was also the time when Pasteur and Koch had established the importance of bacteriology. And so it's not that Ross could have been untouched by the whole thing. And he was already aware of the malaria, the problem of malaria, the issue of sanitary, the possible connection between the two things. So he got a diploma in public health, which had just been started by the Royal Colleges of Physicians and Surgeons, and also took a course of bacteriology under Professor Clean in London. And in the same year, he published two novels. He also got married. He did everything in that 1 year. Yeah. And he was obviously bitten by the bug of looking for a cure for malaria. Because guess what was there in the young married couple's luggage when they embarked for India on August 1, 1889? Yes, you're close. Full box of cultures of bacteria from the lab, which Mrs. Ross had to bring from Bangalore to her husband in Burma.
How romantic, right?
Very.
Just on your in the early bloom of your wedding, and here is a husband who doesn't have perfumes and lavender and stuff like that, but he has mosquito stuff.
Slides. Interesting.
So here he was already carrying slides of of mosquito samples, because by this time there was already some suggestions, at least in the scientific world, that there were these parasites that may be responsible. But the mystery was that, okay, parasites always need some sort of carrier. So what are these carriers? So one of the names that is kind of very closely associated with the with associating parasites with their hosts is the French physician and army doctor Alphonse Laveran. So in 1880, Laveran, who incidentally then went on to win a Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1907, a French army doctor who was working in Algeria, he discovered the malarial parasite in human blood cells. So he made this connection that there is this parasite which is linked with with the infection. And within a decade, his findings had gained wide acceptance. He had later on in life, Laveran also was famous because he had found out the filarial parasite. That is, the filariasis, the disease, was actually caused by a parasite, and that was carried by a species of mosquito. So, in fact, that was actually why he, won the Nobel Prize much later on. So, mosquito has something to do with parasite, and parasite is what causes infection. This link had started to be
Started forming. It had not, I mean, the links
coalesced.
had not been completely established, but yes, a hazy picture was emerging. In 1883, A.F.A. King published in America 19 reasons for assuming that malarial poisons were brought from marshes by mosquitoes and that they were inoculated human beings with it by their bite.
So we had referenced Italy. So even there was the Italian doctor come zoologist Giovanni Battista Grassi. He also, along with uh, his fellow Italian scientists Giuseppe Bastianelli and Amico Bignami, he had demonstrated the life cycle of the Plasmodium falciparum, which is basically the parasite that causes the most intense version of malaria in human beings. So basically, all around Europe, there was this realization that there was mosquitoes, and it was already well known that the mosquito comes in. There are several species. It was not enough to just say mosquitoes. There were like 50, 60 species.
50, 60.
Much
There
more
were
than that.
far more.
Well,
And
at least 50, 60 that were identified that time.
as the culprit,
And they
possible
all knew
culprits.
that different species carried were vectors of different
Diseases.
diseases. So there is filariasis, there is the culex mosquitoes carried something else. So it was not really it was necessary to find out which particular species was linked to malaria,
Yeah.
and also the life cycle, and also how exactly is
This
it causing it.
transmission happened.
So after all of this, the dominant theory still turned out to be that it somehow the mosquitoes got were infected, and the mosquitoes, when laying their eggs, they somehow in the swamps, etc., they passed it on into the swamps, and from there somehow those that those germ particles actually were released into the air, and that's how human caught it. So that the idea that it was still malaria, it had something to do with the air, still hadn't gone out of people's ideas. There is parasite mosquito, but somehow it's going. But this does not seem very logical, and I guess there were other scientists who then had alternate theories about it.
Another very important figure of this time and in this field of study was Patrick Manson. He was known as the father of tropical medicine. Manson also was a subscriber of this theory that malaria might be spread by mosquitoes. And why do I mention Manson in particular? Because in 1894 Ross met Manson in London, and Manson showed him something incredible under the microscope: tiny parasites in the blood of malarial patients. These were the Plasmodium parasites. For, as Jacob, you just said that these parasites were first identified by the French scientist Alphonse Laveran in 1880. Manson's so obviously Ross was hooked. When he returned to India, he returned to India with a mission to prove that the mosquitoes were the culprits. But here's the catch: Ross had no formal training in parasitology. Ross had no formal training in parasitology, no fancy lab, no team of researchers. He was basically a one man science machine, armed with a microscope, some mosquito nets, and sheer determination. So in 1896, he began working more constantly on the malaria experiments, breeding from larvae not all varieties of mosquitoes, dissecting them and looking for the uh, parasite. And what is really important here is that all this research was done on his time and his dime.
And he was always, he was quite upset, and I would say rightfully so, that he was not really encouraged by his by his superiors. They I mean, he was based for a while in Secunderabad, and he had his researchers, his institute over there. So here he was in Secunderabad. He had put this setup, multiple species over there, and it was here that he actively uh, made the connection that which particular species was involved, and this was the Anopheles species. And this actually turned out to be a matter of controversy because there was a whole dispute whether had his findings already been scooped by Grassi in Italy.
Who we have mentioned earlier.
So while the European scientists were actually trying to choose between different fields, Grassi came from a very different from a very different background. He was not the kind of physician or scientist who, like Ross, was dissecting mosquitoes, etc. He was somebody who came from an evolutionary biologist, zoologist kind of background. He had a macro awareness of it, so he knew in Italy which were the swamplands, which were the species of mosquitoes found, and he correlated it with instances of fever and malarial outbreak. He knew which particular species were present, and he actually had boiled it down to two or three specific species, one of which was the Anopheles. In fact, there was actually this whole story about how there was a British scientist who had visited these Italians in his labs. And, initially they were all very pally and sharing information. But then after some time, the Italian scientists suspected that Charles was some kind of a spy who was out to kind of uh, extract information about what progress had their group made vis-a-vis, the British groups. So there was already competition,
Intrigue in air,
and
not
in
just
fact, there were
bad
these
air.
correspondences that were then shared by Charles to Manson, and Manson, of course, to
So interestingly, Manson and Ronald Ross had very long and intensive correspondence. I think, yes, Ross writes that each letter of his was about 1,000 words long, and he wrote some 110 letters to him, and Manson wrote back about 65 odd. But while you talk about Grassi, and simultaneously here back in India in Secunderabad on August 20th, 1897, Ronald Ross finds that it is the Anopheles mosquito which is carrying the parasite. Now, the interesting thing is, let me just
and a
read,
female Anopheles.
and a female Anopheles at that.
So it was this correspondence that was going on that actively were kept, Ross's enthusiasm and alive, because he was not really getting much support from the larger Indian medical service establishment in India. And after he made this discovery, I mean, technically, funds should have flown in and he should have been immediately featured. But, he de- he demanded some more research assistance, some more help to more strongly establish the case, of that it was this particular parasite and this particular species. But he was then transferred to
The Rajputana region,
Rajputana, and this
region
was a
where some conflict was going on
and there
and
was and
active
he
raging.
actually first thought that it was to investigate malaria or something over there, but it wasn't. There was hardly any malaria
And the
over there.
funny bit is that Ross writes that a lot of his research was done on his time, as in he had to take leave go to various regions. In fact, in Sikandrabad, he went specifically to the jungle where there was malaria was more prevalent. He fell sick multiple times, but he notes that there were other colleagues of his who used to get long holidays to pursue sports. One of his colleagues got 6 months off to do riding. So he was very, very, very angry.
But, this is what really actually marks out serendipity in science too. And that, you should always make, lime juice out of lemon situation. So when he was in Rajputana, there was no scope of all of this mosquitoes and malaria. But over there, because he could not yet prove the connection between malaria and the mosquitoes and parasites and humans. Those two, the bridge was yet to be connected. People found the same parasites in people, the same parasite in mosquito, but how this transmission happened wasn't yet known. But it was over in Rajputana. That is where he started investigating birds. And instead of infecting humans or people, those where we started out a reading with him running around looking for people to
Yeah.
infect.
And he was very pissed that even if he gave 1 rupee per prick,
Yeah.
the pricks weren't turning
The
up.
pricks weren't turning up. And he started, he found a lot of birds, and it ranged everywhere from sparrows to pigeons. And he managed to inoculate those, basically have the mosquitoes bite these birds.
Uncomplaining poor birds.
Poor birds,
Yeah, I know.
Oh, the ornithologist in you must be
I am no ornithologist,
apoplectic.
but I'm just.
Yeah, after
Yeah,
all, Salim Ali, what would Salim Ali have done if he saw Ross?
Probably Salim Ali would have stood over his shoulder and would have been equally interested. I can totally see.
But this would have been Salim Ali's making curry out of birds period, right? So he would have been okay with it.
Anyhow, carry on.
So he came and he started out these experiments, and then he was able to show quite conclusively that the same parasites that were there in the mosquitoes were being transmitted in the bird. And over time, this was kind of very definitive proof that there was a cycle of
The
transmission
cycle was complete.
of transmission that was going on.
And he got his Nobel for
Not
this.
yet, not yet.
Not yet? Okay. I
But
shall
again,
hold my
after this, he
horses.
was transferred to Calcutta,
Calcutta.
inexplicably again, and where he was actually tasked with investigating Kala Azar, which was again a disease that people actually suspected that, there was again a mosquito, responsible for
Connection,
this.
yeah.
But as it turned out much later, that it was not really a mosquito, it was another flea, a parasite that was by a flea. And but over here, there is still that laboratory of his, and there is a hospital in Calcutta, and they have this plaque over there that commemorates him, as well as one of those his own poems in one of those buildings that
he
marks out
loved to
his.
write poems for everything, to mark every sort of. So the day he discovered on August 20th, the day he discovered that Anopheles mosquitoes carry the parasite, he wrote a poem to his wife. This day, relenting God hath placed within my hand a wondrous thing, and God be praised at his command. So, yeah, great prose poem. You will not understand it. It's beyond your understanding. Carry on.
But one more momentous thing happened in Calcutta regarding this, that he made this final link. For example, how was the mosquito actually transmitting it? And through dissections, through through his research, he found out that the parasites that were there in the stomach were actually
Of the mosquitoes.
were actually making its way into the thoracic cavity, into the salivary glands. And in fact, the salivary glands of the mosquito weren't actually, it was not in, he said he was unaware of, what he was seeing, because, it was not yet identified. So it was over here that it's actually, the parasites are actually moving into the glands, and it is through their saliva that they transmit it into the person when the mosquito actually bites.
Right.
So it goes back to that old question that, this was not just a parasite that a mosquito was carrying that was infecting it. What ultimately Ross proved and shown what this was actually a very intricate and very intriguing cycle. In fact, parasitologists actually have hold the plasmodium in great awe because of the way evolution has shaped this parasite to move between the human and mosquito species. So now a lot of the links were cleared. There is an infected mosquito, it bites the person, the plasmodium particles are it go into the bloodstream. From there it goes into the liver, and this stage is of a human being. The stages of course were clarified much later, but over there they grow into the liver. Then they are once they reach a ripening stage, they actually burst out into smaller pustules or particles. Then they go back into the bloodstream. And from here, that is when it is in the process of this being the bloodstream that, we feel our fevers and the sicknesses. But now these infect the red blood cells. And it is in the red blood cells that somehow magically these same particles, they become they become sexually reproducing gametes. And now what happens is that once a mosquito then comes in contact with an infected human being, it absorbs, when it is during its blood meal, it absorbs this blood, and then it again, it goes into the mosquito, and then through the salivary gland, the parasite is able to infect a third person. So it's almost a cycle. It's actually people who infect mosquitoes and mosquitoes who infect people back. It's actually a very chicken and egg kind of
My
situation.
God.
So it was unraveling this mystery mechanism that was very, that was very intriguing.
And imagine all this happened out of sheer luck, because he had been dissecting so many mosquitoes. He had been going catching mosquitoes, bringing them in different bottles, opening
But
up their
even the
stomachs.
process of determining, of finding the evidence was actually quite fascinating. In fact, no, no, when he won the Nobel Prize, he had this really, really long lecture, and where he gave an entire description of the process by which all this happens and the manner of discovery. All the and it is an exhaustive kind of read. The people in the lecture must have, I guess, slept off beyond a point,
If a person is like me, definitely would have
but it
slept off.
was it.
There is an interesting line, Jacob, from a book that I recently read, only a part of it, The Fever: How Malaria Has Ruled Humankind for 500,000 Years, written by Sonia Shah. There's a very interesting line about our dear parasite, the parasite. She writes, in order to survive, the malaria parasite must extort from two different species: the animal whose blood it feeds upon, and the insect who deposits it into the animal's blood. It is sort of like robbing a bank while stealing a car. And as you said, things get complicated. It is a full cycle.
Yeah. So in fact, many times, there has always been the, I mean, when you really look at it from a non-human perspective, it's almost as if, mosquitoes might be complaining that, human beings are the carriers of this parasite which is infecting our species.
If only mosquitoes could write the
Yeah.
history.
And, it's a poor Anopheles, and so will be the females that
And
are the
that
carriers.
too, there is a gender angle.
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
all they're doing is they're taking a blood meal to feed their own eggs for the
Progenies,
for the
yeah.
progeny. So
Mhm.
the it's really a case as to who's to blame, or are we infecting? Are we a scourge for the mosquitoes, or are the mosquitoes a scourge for us? So it's a matter of who infects, who
And
infects whom.
that's a good parting thought,
But also,
perhaps.
I mean, even though Ross was somebody who later on advocated that malaria be handled as a public health, public health intervention. I mean, there were these two schools of thought regarding malaria, that, should we have better medicines to combat the disease or to combat the sicknesses, or should we put more of our efforts towards eliminating mosquitoes itself? And even today, that debate continues, though evidence shows that, in especially in Africa, it is the use of widespread mosquito nets. Earlier on, the use of DDT, though that was controversial for some time because of its other poisonous aspects. But it is that has kind of, contained malaria. For example, Italy, malaria is non-existent, but it still thrives in, its several parts of Africa, even in India too, though the numbers have dramatically, at least in terms of mortality, have dipped. But even Ross had a kind of mentality which is called the white man's burden mentality, as to why malaria had to be addressed. So I quote from something that he wrote: unlike many diseases, it is essentially an endemic, a local malady, and one which unfortunately haunts more especially the fertile, well-watered and luxuriant tracts, but particularly those which are of the greatest value to man. Then it strikes down not only the indigenous barbaric population, that's us, Shobana, you and I, but with still greater certainty, the pioneers of civilization, the planter, the trader, the missionary, the soldier, or white people.
White people. Poor people.
It is therefore the principal and gigantic ally of barbarism. No wild deserts, no savage races, which again is Africans and Indians in his worldview. No geographical difficulties have proved so inimical to civilization as this disease. So it's almost like, the way Kipling and all would have
We
written
almost
about.
love, mild racist English
Well, that
gentlemen.
was how these people, because the English saw themselves as on a civilizational mission, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as we've learned from
I
our
mean,
histories.
if you come to our show, you will have many of these
Yeah.
gentlemen.
So in fact, they
to
say
learn
that is
about.
why, in his view, why Africa never developed. We may almost say, and I quote, we may almost say that it has withheld an entire continent from humanity. The immense and fertile tracts of Africa, what we call the dark continent, should be called the malarious continent. And for centuries, the successive waves of civilizations which have flooded and fertilized Asia, Europe, and America have broken themselves in vain upon its deadly shores because of malaria keeping it back. And finally, one more interesting thing is malaria also kind of reminds me of, even though it has been effectively proved that, it has got nothing to do with the air. That was the whole point of this whole investigation, right? But the name persists
Yeah.
in Mel area. It's almost like Christopher Columbus, even after being proved wrong that, he had not discovered India, they still call them Indians anyway, right? Or you call them West Indies and
Yeah.
whatever.
That's all we have, and it is the rainy seasons, and I'm sure you will, while getting bitten by a million mosquitoes,
So
you
keep
will
your
have
long clothes and your mosquito repellent creams, because Ronald Ross is gone, but malaria hasn't.
has it, but you can always have us in your ears to tell you about the stories of that bloody mosquito biting you. And me, Shobna K. Nair, till we see you the next time, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.